It is the most dysfunctional political arena in the country, City Hall. The reason it's so dysfunctional, we have 44 people trying to make a decision that can't make a decision.
This affects the way people are represented, the very structure of the government closest to the people, and the notion that we will make significant change to that structure without absolutely any public consultation, with no public consultation or discussion with the people, isn't right, and it isn't necessary.
A political battle is brewing in Ontario. Premier Doug Ford is going to slash the size of Toronto's City Council by nearly half. The number will drop from 44. It was going to jump to 47, now back down to 25. Toronto's downtown core could see the biggest change. That sparked immediate backlash both inside and outside City Hall. Many people are calling the plan undemocratic. That's because Doug Ford, who's a former Toronto councillor himself, did not include the seat cut plans as part of his provincial election promises. It's time now for the Sunday Scrum. Joining us from Ottawa is the Globe and Mail columnist John Ibbitson. Hello, John.
Hello.
And joining us from Godrich, Ontario is Star Metro national columnist Vicky Muchama. Hi, Vicky.
Hi.
Just making sure we got that connection. Okay, Vicky, let's begin with you. And this announcement, first we got the reports, then we got the confirmation the Premier wants to slash Toronto City Council by nearly half. What did you make of that announcement?
I think those who are claiming that it's undemocratic are accurate. We're heading into a municipal election in Toronto, especially, where we're looking at major questions about how the city is run. And for a former city councillor himself to then step in and assert his powers from above and say that he's going to fundamentally change how the city runs, especially heading into an election, raises the questions of his partiality, especially about the city of Toronto. And so I think it's not surprising. However, it is hugely troubling, though he's going to fundamentally change it. He's also claiming that it's because City Council is intractable and that there isn't enough political representation. Cutting it in half doesn't actually help to do any of that. What it does do is create a democratic deficit where a large and growing city is going to have fewer people who are able to ably represent the citizens within it.
John, your initial reaction when you heard the news?
Yeah, it's arbitrary. It's vindictive because he had a not particularly successful time on City Council. Neither did his late brother, Rob Ford. It's very much, as I wrote, like the Mike Harris government, moving very quickly on a number of fronts in all directions so that your opponents are left unbalanced and unable to really focus. It would work very well for the Harris government, and I suspect it's working well for the Ford government. That said, if I could make one point, the Globe had a story about plans that the Ford government has to privatize marijuana sales once they become legal in October. That's a hugely important story. It's a hugely important story to everyone in Ontario who may or may not want to acquire marijuana. And it's a hugely important story across the country because Ontario is the largest single jurisdiction and Ontario is proceeding with private sales. That will increase the emphasis in other jurisdictions to go to private sales as well. That story matters. This story, I have to say, the CBC is headquartered in downtown Toronto. The Globe and Mail is headquartered in downtown Toronto. This story is far more important to a lot of people on this show than it is even within the province of Ontario and certainly nationally overall.
Well, let me challenge that for just a second, John, because what we're hearing is that in fact, had this been a part of Ford's election promises, that potentially he might have gotten support for it. The issue is around how he's done it. We're in the middle of the Toronto municipal election. Campaigns have already started. Candidates have already put their names forward. So that was part of the concern that we also heard from the Mayor, John Tory. I want to play a couple of clips for you on that because Ford has acknowledged that the government is going to move ahead with their plan, and then the Mayor had this reaction. Let's take a listen.
What we don't need, and what I just can't support, is change being rammed down our throats without a single second of public consultation. And on top of that, done in the middle of the election period itself. You don't change the rules in the middle of the game. That is not right, and that is not fair.
John, I want to get your response to that.
Yeah, look, I do believe it is arbitrary and vindictive and unfair. I also believe it's part of the Ford government's governing approach, which is to demonize downtown progressive elites and in doing so appeal to the support of middle-class suburban voters outside the downtown cores of Toronto. All I'm saying is, in a way, you're falling for it. By making it such a huge story and by pulling, everybody sort of yelling at the top of their lungs and pulling at their hair, they're making it exactly what the Ford government wants it to become, a contest between downtown progressive elites and the rest of the province. There are other things that the Ford government is doing that I completely do not support, such as cancelling existing contracts on alternative electrical generation, that again are serious and substantive. This is, at the end of the day, folks, just a process story.
What do you think, Vicky?
I don't disagree with that. I think it's about how the city is able to make decisions and for the citizens of the city to understand their political system. And switching from 47 city councillors to 26 is a huge change to that. It massively affects what they're able to do. And so I think it's odd for John Tory, who, in that statement that you aired, he does sound forceful and he does sound like he came out against this choice, but he also immediately validated it, suggesting that possibly the city could have a referendum on whether this plan was effective. He's ultimately saying that, yes, that is actually the kind of reform he would like to see. Him and the Fords aren't substantially, when it comes to politics, they're not that far from each other. And so I think it's odd for him to not have fully and strongly protected the city's interests. Instead, he opted to validate the concerns of the premier, which the city lawyer then said they don't even have the opportunity to hold that referendum, nor are they able to maybe put forward a strong case. And so the mayor didn't exactly come out against the premier. He, in that one statement, did, but in terms of what he's actually done, no.
It's interesting you bring this up because, of course, the mayor got some flack in City Hall on Friday about this because there became some revelations that, in fact, Ford might have hinted towards this move earlier on. So Michael Layton, who is the son of former NDP leader Jack Layton, was pretty heated in an exchange with the mayor. Let's take a listen to that.
Who knew about this in advance? Because it has been suggested that somebody knew about this in advance and didn't bring it to our attention.
I think you should stand in your place and apologize to me and to this chamber for getting up and in that kind of that way where you're just kind of implying it but not saying it. Get up if you have the balls to do it and say it.
Vicky, what do you think?
I mean, that is the most forceful I think anyone has ever seen John Tory. He's a man who likes to use 17 words where 2 will do, and this is the most direct statement he's made. But it's odd that he chose to go after a fellow city councillor a day after finding out that this massive change was about to happen, instead of speaking that directly and that forcefully to the premier.
John, I want to address another issue that's come up around these changes towards how municipal politics will move forward in the next few months, and that's whether this was an act of revenge or perhaps targeting political foes. There was some speculation that, in fact, Ford moved forward with this move to prevent former leader of the Ontario PC party, Patrick Brown, from getting the seat of representing Peel Region. So now that position as regional chair will be appointed, not elected. So instead, Patrick Brown is going to run for the mayor of Brampton. And we, in fact, spoke with him yesterday, put that question to him. Let's have a listen to what he had to say.
I'm not going to speculate on what his decision-making process is. I would hope that he wouldn't be changing municipal governance in Ontario just based on personal relationships.
Do you think it was based on personal relationships?
Oh, I think absolutely it was based on personal relationships. And it's distressing for those small C conservatives who were dismayed, first of all, that Doug Ford won the leadership of the Progressive Conservative Party rather than one of the more sort of mainstream contenders. And then, there was so much animus towards the Liberal government that the Conservatives won themselves a majority government. The hope was among Conservatives that he had a good group of advisors around him. He had a fairly strong cabinet, that he would listen to the council, recognizing that he has no experience at the provincial level as a politician at all, and be guided by their advice. We now know that at least in some aspects, when it is something that affects him personally, like his past on city council, he will exercise the full powers of the office of premier, which are considerable, for personal, petty, and vindictive acts. It does not look good on him, and it does not bode well for his government.
Okay, we'll leave that part of the discussion there, and we want to get folks at home involved in the debate. You can tweet me at Natasha Fatha, and remember to use the hashtag SundayScrum. Up next, Toronto calls for an outright ban on handguns following last week's deadly mass shooting. Now, it comes as federal legislation seeking to tighten access to firearms is already being tabled. So what changes could be coming, and how much of an impact would they actually have? We'll get our Sunday Scrum to weigh in on that.